there's such a pushback against it. I mean, I never saw doctors going on YouTube and making videos about why you're getting type 2 diabetes, why eating all this processed food is really bad for you. Not one doctor, but I've seen several doctors come out against the carnivore diet.
Jason, how did you find carnivore?
Um, I came to about it in a strange way. I'd been diagnosed with psoriatic arthritis. I'd been taking medicine for about 10 years. And I have an HSA. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those, but it's a health savings account where actually you can put money aside for medical bills, but if you don't access that money, it can grow tax free. It's triple tax deferred, so it's a really good vehicle for savings and investments and looking after your health. But at the end of around 2014, I had anywhere from $8,000 to $9,000 in medical bills. So I was seeing a rheumatologist, psychiatrist. I was on sleeping pills, anxiety pills, arthritis pills, muscle relaxers, and I wasn't feeling any better. And at that point, I didn't know if there was a solution, but I was determined to try and find one. So I went vegetarian, like any smart person would, plant based. Became pre-diabetic, gained about 15 pounds. Then stumbled upon Butter Bob. I don't know if you've seen his videos, but it was in my algorithm. And I remember seeing the thumbnail and thinking, that's crazy. Eat more fat to lose weight or something. Um, but I watched the video and, I saw him. And to me, I don't understand how people can refute some of these just visual changes that people experience. So I went keto. And one reason I really want to talk to you, Dave, is because I'm one of these people. I see so many comments on these videos that within a week I felt better. Within 4 days I started feeling better. I'm on day 67. This is my second go around with carnivore. I just stopped taking ibuprofen on Monday, but that's it. That's the only med I've been taking. Um, but keto didn't work for me at all. So, like I said, I have psoriasis, and I think it was because I was eating a lot of peanut butter and stuff that's kind of keto friendly, but it's got seed oils, and it's not really good for you. I realize that now, but I didn't want to give up my sugar. That's something else I've learned in this journey. I never really struggled with weight, but I'm a food addict, so or a sugar addict. Um, so anyway, my wife had been real patient with me. She allowed me to retire. I had been training for a professional fight when my arthritis started. And so I'm a former Marine, and I had this background of I can tough my way through my problem, right? And so I tried that for a long time. So I wasn't on any medicine. I wasn't seeing any doctors. I believed rather there was a solution out there, but I hadn't found it. And my wife told me at some point, my timeline's a little off, but in the last few years, look, if you don't get better because we couldn't walk or run together, you're going to have to go to the doctor and get on medicine. And I was like, well, I don't want to do that. So I tried the carnivore diet as an elimination diet as just kind of a last gasp effort. I hated vegetables my whole life, but it didn't make sense to me that I shouldn't eat any vegetables. The programming is very strong, and so I was like, I'll do this and see if it works, and then I'll start adding stuff back. Well, that was in 2021, and she went with me. Um, we went for about 6 months, and I went into full remission. So, I mean, running. I was 49 at the time. I'm 53. I'll be 54 this year. And I remember telling her, "Oh, I think I could start boxing again." Now, this is the delusional athlete for you, but I'd never felt that good at 35, right? So here I'm at 49. My reflexes are better. I'm not drinking alcohol anymore because I'd struggled with drinking too much alcohol before carnivore. And I was telling you before, somehow the carnivore diet just helped me give up things that I had trouble giving up before. Um, so anyway, I got immediate results, but I took it for granted. And I say that I had been living by carnivore principles since then because it's true. I mean, mostly ate eggs and meat, but I was still having my binges where I wanted some pasta, I wanted some sugar. And slowly and surely, the arthritis came back. Where this December, I could barely walk. Now, up into December, we were still running. So I had some pain, but it wasn't really affecting me. The winter seems to make it worse. And then in December, it came back pretty bad. And I told her, all right, we got to do this again. We got to go strict, no condiments, no cream. no cheese. I know, that's okay on the carnivore, but for me, I just wanted to give everything up again. And so we started a 100-day challenge, and I'm on day 67 today. And like I said, I just got off ibuprofen this week. Uh, we've run we ran 20 times last month, so 20 days out of something. And in February, I couldn't run. I could barely walk. So those results they speak for themselves. It is just the inflammation in my body, and I don't care what anyone says. Meat doesn't cause inflammation. So, um, and I know that from my personal experience. I don't need a study to tell me otherwise. Uh, so I wanted to come talk to you because it does work. Now, I did want to point out. I think I got sidetracked. It did take me like 60 days to get here. So for the first 30 days of carnivore, there's even a point where I usually feel worse. I don't know if it's the oxalate poisoning or some of the things these doctors talk about, but the only reason I stick with it is because I know that there's light at the end of the tunnel. But I see so many people that have instant results, and I want to tell people that are trying this that stick with it and give it a fair shake. I think Dr. Baker says like 6 months, but I'd say at least 90 days of strict carnivore, no condiments. Not to give anyone advice. I'm not a nutritionist or a doctor, but you got to give it time to work.
Yeah, well, congratulations, especially, um, I mean, especially coming from, as a previous well, as an alcoholic, congratulations on getting off the alcohol. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was
Um,
really, really funny, Dave. I had no plans of not drinking. Now, one of the few dietary recommendations they will give you with psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis is don't smoke and don't drink alcohol. That's about all they figured out. And so it did actually, confound my arthritis. It made it much worse, but I couldn't quit. And what I think is so fascinating is somehow when I started feeding myself properly and treating my body the right way, I wanted to give up alcohol. And the funny thing is I'll still occasionally have a drink during football season, but I'll get a headache almost immediately and get that hungover feeling before I even get a buzz. And it's really like my body's telling me, you're poisoning yourself, like literally telling me, don't do this. And I'll remember, there's a nostalgia. I want to remember all the great times I had when I was drinking. Of course, none of those times were great either, but when you're drunk, you think you're the life of the party. Um, and so it is much easier to give up sugar as long as I'm strict carnivore. It's so insidious that if I have like a pint of Ben and Jerry's, that I might eat sugar for a week before I stop. But I have direct feedback from my organism that things like alcohol, sugar, funny asparagus. When I added back asparagus, one of the only vegetables I like, caused severe inflammation. For a long time, I thought sweet potatoes were like a super good, healthy food I could indulge in, just as bad as sugar for me. So it's interesting to me that without doing an allergy test, I feel like I'm allergic to almost anything but meat.
yeah, it's interesting also how you said, I don't need a study to tell me this works. I know it works." And, um, that's kind of the way I feel as well, like, there's so many people out there that are saying, "Oh, you gotta be careful with this. It's gonna give you heart disease, gonna give you colon cancer, gonna give you all these problems, blah, 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 blah." But, I know how I feel, and so it's like, I also know how I feel on sugar and processed food, and it's not good.
Yeah.
And yeah, so, yeah, it's interesting that you kind of mentioned that.
Let me piggyback on that because both my grandfathers had heart surgeries in their 50s. Um, and it runs rampant in my family. And so, like I said, this was a last ditch kind of thing. Now, before I went keto, I had stumbled down the Ansel Keys cholesterol statins rabbit hole. And if you really research that stuff, the whole foundation for saturated fat and cholesterol is nonsense, right? He fed red meat to rabbits to prove that it caused heart disease. The fact that people come on these sites and they make these comments of things that we've all heard, right? Don't eat too much saturated fat, don't eat too much red meat. Every carnivore's heard that. We're not stupid. maybe some of us are, but it's at some point you got to ask the question. When we look at the Americans, I think of Western culture because that's all I'm basically exposed to is if this were working, because I think Baker's put up the, excuse me, Dr. Baker, some of the charts of, or Jason Fung. I've seen these charts where as soon as they introduce the low fat diet and statins, everything goes through the roof in terms of autoimmune disease. And the thing is, that's just a correlation, of course. But if you also dig into the numbers, people are eating less meat and they are trying to eat low fat and they're still getting sicker and fatter. So you can't dispute that visual evidence either. But like you said, it's funny now because if you read any of these hatchet mainstream articles about the carnivore diet, they'll even say in there, even if you feel good, don't pay attention to that. Well, I mean, the only time you're supposed to go to the doctor is when you don't feel good, right? When you feel like something's wrong. And now they're telling you, you know, don't believe how you feel. And I really do think I'm kind of a conspiracy guy. I think it's a conspiracy. You won't hear too many people say this, but I really do think somebody up there in the hierarchy wants people sick and medicated.
So it's interesting. It's like what they say about politicians, right? It's like, don't believe your lying eyes.
That's what I was trying to think of. But yeah, exactly. Uh, it's shocking. I mean, of course, we don't have any real nutritional studies ever, right? So most of the studies are epidemiological, observational, self-reporting. And now they won't even study the carnivore diet in most cases because they say it's unethical, right? That oh, who's going to be our control group? Who are we going to feed all this red meat to? Which is just an excuse because they don't want the truth to come out. I think, and it's sad.
I agree. They no one wants to study it, like from food companies or from the pharmaceutical industry or anything like that. They don't want a study to be done because it could be catastrophic to their business.
Yeah. Well, so I was watching Dr. Eric Westman, and he was talking about, he does a keto group for Duke University. I mean, there's obviously some legitimate, high level doctors that work through this diet. Um, and they were studying fatty liver disease, and they were studying a new drug because there is no drug for fatty liver disease, at least not approved yet. And he was like, "Hey, look, I got some great news. We have some results from our keto group where their fatty liver is getting reversed and it's getting better." And they basically told him, "We don't care about that, because they get their funding, I'm sure, to create medicine, but." And I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I saw this video where he was talking about it, and it didn't surprise me. I used to play basketball with a guy who works at Gilead Sciences, and they were for a long time working on a drug for that. And I asked him before I'd even learned about food, Mike, if people change their diet, could they could they cure this condition? And he's like, sure, absolutely. And so this is kind of like one of those things where it just gets me thinking, like, most of our diseases in the Western culture are lifestyle diseases, right? High blood pressure, heart disease, autoimmune disease, I believe is a lifestyle disease. And so all the money that we're spending on healthcare is really mostly lifestyle diseases. And so there used to be a time I was alive when the doctor would ask you about your weight and what you ate. And even if they didn't know anything about nutrition, they gave it some lip service. In California now, if you're overweight and you don't want to talk to your doctor about it, you just tell him before the meeting, before you see your doctor, and he won't because he doesn't want to offend you or upset you, right? And I mean, I don't think overweight necessarily leads to sickness, but there's a huge correlation between it's something you should consider for your health. And it's not something we should tell doctors, don't hurt your patient's feelings, but that's the world we live in these days.
Once political correctness enters the doctor's office, it's all over.
It's terrible though. I mean, because now we have fat doctors, you know.
It's almost like, the patient's like, "Don't ask me about my weight," and the doctors are like, "Well, I won't if you won't."
Well, I shouldn't say fat. Like, I'm not trying to disparage anybody. I'm fortunate that somehow throughout my journey, I never really gained too much weight. Obviously, I had metabolic disorder. Um, I got up to 190 at one point. I'm 5'7". my grandfather played professional baseball at 200 pounds, so we're kind of husky people anyway. Um, and I will say, it's not all roses for me with the carnivore diet. Right now, I'm desperately trying to hold on to 160 pounds. Um, and when I give up cream, I usually can't. So I'm kind of probably overeating meat, and that's probably more of an idea that I have and what I want for my weight. A healthy body, and maybe not the right idea. But it's just like everything else. I'm having to work through that. When I was boxing at 141 pounds because in amateur boxing there's not as many weight classes. But I was walking around at 155, 160, so I'd have to cut close to 20 pounds. Um, and it just I know part of the aging process is that you got to keep your muscular skeleton. You got to keep your muscles healthy, and I don't lift weights, but I want to be strong. I don't want to lose my utility of my strength, and so I just I'm amazed. I'm glad I got a chance to talk to you about this at how well this works. But I've heard people say it's simple, but it's not easy, and I mean that's how I describe it because not only my wife has to do this with me. I've seen some of these other channels where they have kids and the spouse that's not on the carnivore diet. I mean, if there's crap at my house, it's gonna get eaten, and that's gonna make me sick. But that means I can't walk or run with her. So she commits to that. I will say this: she's a healthcare actuary, so she has access to a lot of data. And it wasn't hard for me to convince her once I showed her some Dr. Chafee and some Dr. Baker videos and, really start digging into the stuff. My wife on this 100-day challenge has lost 25 pounds, 20 pounds. The most interesting thing, and I don't like to curse, but I always thought it was bullshit on some of these anecdotes. She stopped using her inhaler. Now, she still uses it occasionally, like every other day, every 3 days. But when I met her, she was running marathons and she used those inhalers several times a day. So, without question, there's been a huge improvement in, her asthma just being on the carnivore diet, which, like I said, I was like, that's crazy, right? She's been asthmatic since she was a kid. I didn't think there was any way. I figured, I don't know too much about asthma, but I figured, it's basically suggesting it's healing her lungs, you know, um, and evidently that might be what's happening. So,
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to people that their lungs are getting better, like they've had emphysema or COPD, and that's getting better as well. So yeah, there must be something to it.
well, sure. And your experience, I mean, it healed your brain. It's just, I don't want to go overboard like this is a panacea and this will fix everything that's wrong with human beings. But most of our diseases that we've caused. One of the doctors she likes says human beings are the only species smart enough to create their own food and then dumb enough to eat it. Dr. Lufkin, and
Mm.
that's us, right? Like, when I think about growing up, I ate Pop Tarts and Rice Krispies and Cocoa Puffs, and I don't blame my parents. But when I started this diet, I didn't think, I'm not someone who eats a lot of sugar, you know, and of course, I didn't realize that rice is sugar, bread is sugar, that and even all these smart people in the comments that talk about you need carbohydrates and sugar. Well, if you understand that your body treats rice and bread like glucose, and then you have the food pyramid, which is a total farce. But if you look at it, there's only like 25 grams of sugar you're supposed to have in a day, right? So when you're eating all that rice and bread, you're even though it recommends, 6 to 8 servings, you're going way over that allotted, amount of sugar.
That's right. You've eaten half a loaf of bread, and you think, "Oh, I've still got 25 grams of sugar I can eat." And it's like, no, no, no.
Within an hour of eating something like that, I'll start having throbbing pains in my wrists or my knees. It's almost instantaneous. So,
So how have you been eating these past 67 days? And are you and your wife basically eating the same times and same way?
yeah. So we usually eat twice a day. I left this out. I did get into fasting at one point. I was convinced that that fasting, not eating, would fix everything. And I saw a lot of anecdotes that suggested it would. It didn't. It didn't work for me at all. I do think there's still health benefits to fasting. But anyway, we don't necessarily adhere to intermittent fasting, but we probably have a 6 hour eating window just because we don't like to eat too late. So if we run in the morning, I found I can't run a new discovery with food in my belly. So we'll usually fast till after we run. Not that I can't, but it's a lot harder. I can actually feel the digestion while I'm running, which I always used to eat before I ran because my God, I'm going to need the energy. Um, and then in the evenings, we'll either have hamburgers. I don't know what steaks cost in Japan, and they're expensive here, but on occasion, I'll have a steak or a prime rib because I do get tired of just eggs and meat. And I think that's the hard part about it. I actually love eggs and meat, but it does get boring. And I just remember I'm not feeding myself for entertainment. I'm not feeding myself to feel good. It's for my health, And I've been thinking about this a lot. My father-in-law is dying from what I believe is statin-induced heart failure, and I've tried to help him several times. And at this point, he's in and out of the hospital. My grandfather went through this. That's why I'm pretty sure this is what it was. And you get to a point where they have to drain your lungs, and it starts happening more and more frequently. You're basically drowning, and it's a horrible way to die. So I keep thinking, when are you going to get to the point like me where you got nothing to lose? I mean, he has no quality of life. But until a doctor, someone with an MD tells him or recommends it, he's not going to try it. So I find that interesting with some people. The comments I see on carnivore websites, I'm going to the doctor. I hope he doesn't prescribe me statins. Don't take them. You don't have to fill the prescription. I don't understand that. It's weird how people give away all their autonomy to the doctors. And the thing is, what I finally realized is no one else is responsible for my health but me. There was a real interesting shift during COVID where they tried to make you feel responsible for someone else's health. The truth is, it's totally dependent on you. I think diet's the most important aspect, but you need exercise, you need sunlight, you need some socialization, probably. I don't get too far into the weeds on the psychology of it all, but um, and you're solely responsible for that. And so I've been telling my wife, our best bet, because we have two nieces and several nephews, I don't get it wrong, I think four, um, is that when we're 60 or 70, they're going to wonder why we're not on seven, maintenance meds and how we're still running half marathons and marathons. And that's my only hope because if I just tell them what I know, Jason's an idiot. He never even went to college, or I didn't finish college. Um, so, it's, I don't know, I went off on a tangent there, but I find it interesting that it's so hard to break the programming. Even so, people even that believe this will work are still worried about their cholesterol. And I don't think it's a something you should completely ignore, but blood work is so transitory, and when you're changing your entire gut bacteria from a processed sugar eating, you're going to have some ups and downs in terms of your blood work. And you certainly shouldn't. I had a friend who lost like 15 pounds, was feeling great, popped a high cholesterol, and just gave up the diet immediately. And I was like, dude, you've lost weight, your blood pressure's down. There's a lot of markers that show you're getting healthier, but you just got one that you've been told your whole life, is bad. And now you're just throwing everything out the window. So I don't know.
I think that's the problem though, like with, where all the numbers get read in isolation.
Right.
So the doctor is programmed to go, okay, well, LDL is bad. And LDL may be bad and it may be atherogenic, but it's probably bad and atherogenic in particular contexts, in conjunction with like being metabolically unhealthy and all these other kind of things, right? Um, I was watching a debate between Paul Saladino and Dr. Allo, cardiologists, one day. And Paul Saladino brought up a good point about this. Like all the numbers that we're looking at, all these averages that are saying that, LDL is a bad thing and high cholesterol is a bad thing. these averages are all taken from a sick population. So of course it's going to look bad, you know? It's yeah.
Well,
So we're kind of making decisions with our eyes closed.
yeah, also, if you actually look at, again, we don't have really any real science around this stuff, but over 55, higher LDL has a lower all-cause mortality, right? And so to me, when you really understand a lipoprotein is actually the linchpin for cellular health, right? So they call it cholesterol, it's actually a lipoprotein. And its job is to go around and repair those cells and everything. It makes sense to me as we get older and our bodies decay, those numbers have to go up, right? You're going to need more and more repair. Now, I do think if you got high triglycerides, low HDL, then you might have a problem. But if I had a LDL of 400 and then my triglycerides are under 100 and my HDL is 50 or 60, I'm not worried about that at all. I don't get blood work because it is so transitory. If you fast 16 hours instead of 12 hours and do your blood work, it's going to be weird. You know, I've done that actually when I was fasting. Um, so from day to day, I think it's who's the guy that's always hacking? I can't remember. He's an engineer, but he's always hacking the cholesterol numbers.
You, Dave Feldman.
Would if you eat a certain meal for 3 days in a row before you get your blood work, it completely changes your cholesterol, right? And so it is very dependent on what you're eating, when's the last time you ate, and I don't think indicative at all. I like this CAC score that some of the other guys talk about, where they test the calcium in your body, which makes sense, um, as opposed to just cholesterol. And certainly, I think personally, statins are the worst drug ever unleashed on the human population, and so I wouldn't take a statin at gunpoint,
Mm.
regardless of my heart health.
But they make so much money.
Well, it's the most, I am invested in the stock market and it is the most lucrative drug ever created. Actually, this doctor that my wife listens to says not only are statins not good, they actually get rid of the good cholesterol. Now, I don't know if that's true, but they actually prevent your body, and your body's making these lipoproteins for a reason. This another thing that really aggravates me is we think we're smart enough to figure out that, oh, through evolution. I don't believe in evolution, but I know most people do. Through evolution, somehow our body made a mistake. This is essentially what they're saying, that it's mistakenly malfunctioned to create too much cholesterol, which causes heart disease. Which how are any of us here?
100%, 100%. Is exactly what I always kind of shake my head at. It's like so every other species got it right
Right?
except us. We had this thing that was just wrong
Malfunction.
with us that can only be solved by a pharmaceutical company.
Yep.
It makes no sense.
Well, it's a little different because I don't see too many. There are carnivores that treat their obesity or, morbid obesity with a diet. I don't really think it's a weight loss diet. It works great for weight loss, but for me, it's more about a health diet. But, my wife's a healthcare actuary. They were just doing one of these videos. They got a 12-year-old kid. They want to give him bariatric surgery and they want to put him on these weight loss drugs, these Wegovys or whatever, the new drugs that everybody's talking. I think they've been around for several years, but they really hit the mainstream. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It used to be at least a pretense of let's change your diet, let's get you some exercise. Even though CETO doesn't work, we at least tried that calories in, calories out, like there is some autonomy here. You can take some responsibility for your condition. It's now it's no, it's just a disease. Obesity is not your fault. It's genetic. And so where were all the fat people 50 years ago if it's genetic? I mean, none of the stuff makes sense when you really think about it. So I told you in my email, I have no faith in doctors or medicine.
Hmm.
I'd have more faith where you're at. I tried acupuncture in my journey. I know that's Eastern medicine. I don't know about Japan. It didn't work for me, but I tried it. I tried ice therapy. That does kind of work. It doesn't get rid of the long-term symptoms, but it helps for a while. So I tried everything, and I'm here to tell you, carnivore works for me completely. The only struggle is, am I going to be smart enough to keep treating myself well?
You said like you still feel sometimes like if there was a carby kind of cake or something in the house, you would feel like it's got to be eaten. Um, I think that passes after a while, though. Like, I think it's different for everyone, but it's like being a smoker or being a drinker. Eventually, if you've given it up long enough, it passes.
Well, that's my hope because now whenever I think about drinking, it's like, no, that's not going to be fun at all. Because the thought is, oh, I'm a big football fan. I like watching LSU football. And I've conditioned myself to drink while I watch football, right? Just like in the South, we condition ourselves to when we see family or friends to give them sugar. It's actually one of the worst things you can do, but that's how we show our love, right? Um, and so I keep telling my wife, like, I'm just waiting for that day when I want to get the ice cream, and my brain actually like clicks in and says, no matter how much you think you're going to enjoy that, you're not. But again, just like with the alcohol, like you said, the further I go, the easier it is. The problem is, and what I learned about food addiction is that it's everywhere. Um, my wife works from home, and I'm retired thanks to her. She allowed me to retire, basically, so I could try and biohack my way to health. Um, but everywhere we go, if there's any sort of social uh, thing and food is being served, there's almost no protein and fat. It's almost all carbohydrates. And I know I ate sugar when I was a kid. I was telling you about my Cocoa Puffs and Pop Tarts, but I went to our niece's like eighth grade graduation, and it wasn't just a few cakes. There was an entire like banquet of cakes, say like 20 cakes for all these kids. And I'm like, this is nuts. I was just kind of starting the keto diet and starting to learn about sugar. But it's definitely inculcated, embedded in our culture here in the West, and I think it's spreading like wildfire everywhere. I think we have it here in the worst.
It's just varying degrees in different countries. It just seems like, America's kind of just a few years ahead of some countries, but Australia and the UK are catching up, if not overtaking in some ways. Like, I heard stuff about Australia perhaps being per capita the most obese country in the world now, something like that.
Okay,
It's yeah, the numbers are shocking. And it's honestly, this is often used as a sales pitch, where people say, "Well, it's not your fault," but, it's really it's hard to say it's people's fault to be that size when, every message they're getting as far as what looks like education is carbohydrates are good for you, carbohydrates are essential, eat your fiber and all this kind of thing.
sure.
Mm.
And I think that's a for me as someone who used to aspire to be a professional athlete, but the first time I ran 10 miles with no carbs, with no food, um, it was like fasting. I was like, whoa, this body I've been told is so limited is actually capable of so much more. So right now I'm just starting to run again, like I said, and I've always been a fast twitch kind of explosive athlete, but now that I'm into this deep well of fat, um, I'm curious about these ultra marathons. I'm not sure if you've heard of them, where you run 50 miles or 100 miles. Anyway, one of my goals is to run a 50-mile race, and I do have joint damage in my feet, so it does start hurting after a while. But anybody who believes that they need carbohydrates for energy should actually do this for a month just to at least disavow themselves of that notion. Because you may go through a keto flu, right? And you may feel bad, but if you get to the point where you're fat adapted and your body's using fat for fuel, you'll be amazed and shocked at I I don't get tired when I run now. The problem is that I don't run with water, and so I might get low on electrolytes. So at some point, if I don't go home and drink some water and get some salt, then I'm going to start getting fatigued. But my muscles aren't tired, and I'll be sore maybe an hour, maybe two after I run. That was my favorite thing about the carnivore diet, that I could work out. Whereas when I was eating carbs, I could barely move the next day. And on the carnivore diet, there will be some inflammation, but it is minimal. compared to what I went through when I was a carb burner. Like when I used to do legs, when I was eating carbs, it'd be hard to get off the toilet, to bend down and stand up just because I would work my body too hard. I'm pretty extreme when I do stuff like that. So and now I wonder, if it's really working your body too hard or just making sure you fuel it the right way. Um, because what I'm doing right now is nothing. There are people, because of their culture, run close to 20 miles a day with very little food, very little water. I remember watching a documentary on this. So I think the carnivore diet does evolutionary wise bring us back into a more um, homeostasis in terms of, and I especially think the important aspect, not even so much for health, well, for mental health, is exercise. I do think that we are hunter gatherers essentially, and that a lot of movement is important for a human being, even if it's just walking. Um, but yeah, I'm sorry, I do get off on these things, but it was amazing to me to run 8 miles without building any sort of aerobic base. So I'm going to run 8 miles today. I haven't built up. I haven't trained to run 3, 4, 5. I'm just going to go do it and see if I can do it. And it's easy.
Mm.
I've run marathons like that too, by the way. I mean, because I'm just stubborn and ignorant like that. But um, I did those marathons on carbs. And so I would be in bed for 2.5 days afterwards, barely able to move, and I didn't run very fast. I'm not a fast runner. But, coming from the Marine Corps, it was more of I was still convinced that if I just pushed hard enough, I could push through my problems. I could tough my way through my problems. Um, and that wasn't true.
Yeah. So just on the Marines, my I've got a very rudimentary understanding of some of this kind of stuff. So, but my understanding of the Marines is it's kind of like an elite force of people who'll go and do special missions and things like that. Um, I would imagine in that situation, like as a Marine, you'd probably get some kind of nutritional advice about how to optimize your body because you have to exercise so much or
No, they don't give you any advice. And I wish I could remember exactly. But I do feel like they were feeding you keto in boot camp, right? So they didn't tell you this is how you're supposed to eat, but like peanut butter was a big treat. Like once every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, they'd say, there's some peanut butter, there's some bread, and you'd have just a few minutes to eat. And man, we'd all be over there, just eating as much peanut butter and sandwiches as we could. But we had diet privates, people who came in overweight, so they'd get different portions. But as I recall, and don't hold me to this, it was mostly vegetables and meat that you had, or eggs when you ate. And I'm not giving away secrets that no one doesn't know that's been through boot camp, but a lot of times you don't get to eat in boot camp because you're bad, because you're not doing what you're supposed to. And so you do learn to fast without wanting to fast. It's a very good fighting group of men. It's my whole idea about the world has changed politically, and so I really enjoyed my time in the Marine Corps. It was good for me, but any one of my nephews that wants to join the service, I do my best to convince them otherwise. Um, I don't want anybody dying for bankers' wars. You know,
that's understandable. Um, so if someone in your family or a friend came to you and said, "Look, you're doing really well on this diet. How do I get started?" What would you recommend they do to get started with carnivore and stay the distance?
geez, no one's asked me that question. I guess first I'd have to find out what they really like to eat because I think the key to maintaining is, do you like steak? See, I can't stand New York strip steak. I don't care if it's on sale. The only steak I really like is ribeye, which of course I think is the most expensive cut. Um, do you like eggs? Do you like cheese with your eggs? Do you like bacon? But like I said, I think the diet itself is pretty simple. Get rid of all the vegetables. Forget about grains and sugar and just eat eggs. and meat. And I guess the one thing I'd say that I keep having to remind myself and my wife is eat until you're full. Um, and when you're hungry, eat. That's why I say you're not trying to lose weight. Um, at least we aren't. We're trying to get healthy first, and then the weight should take care of itself. Um, and so for me, that's what makes this sustainable. Not only the physical benefits, but there's never a day where I'm hungry, where I think, oh, I want to eat, but I shouldn't eat. Find the
Okay.
foods that you like that are carnivore friendly. And so for me, I'm still trying to give up coffee. I know there are some carnivores that are like coffee's not part. It isn't carnivore per se, but and that's something that I'm hoping, like with the sugar and alcohol, that it's just such a ritual to wake up and have a hot cup of coffee in the morning.
Yeah, so Jason, do you have a website or, social media if people wanna reach out to you?
Unfortunately, I do not. I'm sorry. I was telling you, I was a little anxious about doing this. At some point, I got off Facebook and all that stuff because I found it was really personally bad for me. Like I have a hard time interacting on social media properly, I guess. But I do want to try and spread the word as best I can. I watch your videos. I'm sure I'll watch this one and be horrified at myself. But it's the weird thing too, because I was trying to give up YouTube as far as at least engaging, and the device I use for YouTube, it somehow kicked me off so that I can't comment or post. I've been watching your videos, but I can't comment. I don't know what is going on. And the email I use is so old. I don't even know how to log back on. So I'll have to see about that. If I do, I'll send you an email. And I am going to do another podcast. I met a guy here in California, Sacramento, California, who's called the Unscripted Pharmacist, and he gave up his career as a pharmacist when he figured out what was going on with the. It's a really interesting story with the drugs that he was well, not, he wasn't prescribing, but giving to people and so forth. And he asked me to come on his podcast because we just started talking. So this is the first one I've done. I'll probably tell this story again, and just the hopes that, just like anyone else, that it'll jar someone to give it a try. Um, I sent you the email because you had done your short video on spread the word. You're talking about how you have that experience where you talk to people about it, and it really is interesting because I feel like there's more and more people trying it, but it's still like barely a whisper in the consciousness of the world. Yeah, and what's more interesting is there's such a pushback against it. I mean, I never saw doctors going on YouTube and making videos about why you're getting type 2 diabetes, why eating all this processed food is really bad for you. Not one doctor, but I've seen several doctors come out against the carnivore diet on YouTube. Not that I know who these doctors are, but just make a video as to why this is the worst possible diet you could ever be on. And it's just a natural food. So I mean that doesn't even read. Even if you think that too much meat is bad for you, meat itself is not bad for you. It's impossible. It's the whole theory of evolution. This is what kills me about these same people. They say that we came down out of the trees and our brains got bigger and developed because we ate red meat. How could it possibly be bad for us? You know, if you feed a tiger pizza in the zoo, his life will be cut in half. If we are just animals and a product of nature, then we need to eat what made us sentient, conscious, simple. So
100%. Um, so Jason, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I really appreciate your time.
I appreciate yours, Dave. I appreciate you having me on.